Hello, everybody. This is ad hoc design review meeting for conditional authorization KEP 5681 on January 21st. All right, back to you, David.
So I've gone ahead and linked the response to the question. So I was asking, what do we do about secondary authorization checks, like those in validating admission policy or in REST handlers today, where there isn't an obvious admission chain to handle the provided conditions, right? So um, the answer I got was interesting, and I guess I'll let Lucas explain the answer. And not I haven't yet decided whether it's persuasive, but it's interesting. So you should go ahead and talk about it, Lucas.
Right. So, yeah, basically, there's a couple of. I didn't want to put this as part of, like, initially as part of the CAP, but I can add it because it's a good detail. It basically kind of boils down to how far we want to go with it, I guess. Um, so if we think about like the different things that can use conditions, right? Yeah, that's good to have it open there. Um, there's so the APIs are main authorization and addition filter. That's the main use case, right? Then you can have arbitrary SR clients which ask for something and like what permissions do user X have, and then get some conditions back. And maybe you have a union thing or whatever that wants composite authorizer that does something with that, or just a client that wants to understand its own permissions. Then the secondary authorization checks in REST handlers, I tried to find them like all. I'm not sure if I missed any in the CAP, but so for example, if you have an update that turns into a create, right, then we do another to make another kind of in the update REST handler, we check again that you actually have access to create as well, right? So both of those need to kind of the conditions for both of those need to match. And then, well, VAPs, which I guess is the question here, and then possibly the impersonation stuff, which is in the CAP. But yeah, like if we start with the first one, like I think the main thing that I've seen in VAP being used is like kind of synthetic checks on actual like on resources that don't exist, right? So like that are not served by the API server mostly. Stuff like finalizers and signers and things like this to kind of protect a given field. Um, but yeah, then if you wanted to kind of do some ABAC on that, even though it didn't exist, you could kind of pretend like there was that had some schema or structure. I'm not saying like that we would like to do that, but like technically, I guess. But then I think the interesting thing with like authorization having to be kind of the decision is a basically a function of the policy store. So whatever you have in the the authorizer's policy store and the request kind of metadata that comes in. We've or especially Jordan has been talking about like that should be kind of an should not kind of it should specifically not depend on data in a TD, because then you might do at one point you might do one request, right, with some metadata and some policy kind of store stuff, and then you do it 10 minutes later and you get another response, so you cannot cache those things. So if we keep to that, then it means that like whatever you would do a secondary authorization check on has to be in the object already, and there's only so much data that you have in that object. Um,
So
so yeah,
I
that
guess
was
what I
yeah,
took from that was two possible answers. I think is what I took from
yeah.
it. One possible answer is, well, you get the data that would get passed to the admission check, but that may or may not provide value for you. It could, um, but we don't know that it does, and we don't know the schema for it ahead of time because validating admission policy can span multiple object types, right?
Yeah.
Then the second option that you gave, or I guess the first option that you gave, is I just don't do that. And it seems important to decide which of those two things we'll do.
So one thing I can mention as well that I was thinking about as I was thinking about this in more detail was that if you baked in the kind of composite function in the authorizer, so like if the authorizer knew that, okay, now I'm dealing with a CSR type, right? And I know that in order for a user to be authorized to do anything with CSR, they need to have, like the sign permission on the resource signers. Now that's actually also information that the authorizer already has. At least it's for itself. It knows what that no one can create CSRs without also having the permissions on signers. So if you take this, so then it's basically internal within the authorizer, you have a deny policy that says that don't allow this user or like some user to create CSR requests unless they also have use signers or something like that. And then the authorizer knows exactly what those conditions are when the specific users have those permissions. So it could inline them directly and come to the conclusion that Lucas cannot create CSRs because he cannot use any signer, right? So then no matter what the object is, I wouldn't be able to do anything with that.
So if we only considered the admission input itself, then I think we could tell people who wanted to do that they could decompose their expression from the conditional authorization directly into the validating admission policy itself. And that would be equivalent for cell. I don't think it would necessarily be equivalent for the not cell option that we're going to build. I could probably live with that. Was that a response?
I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable to me.
And I mean, so if I understand, like you could, if we had cell as one of the languages, one of the condition types, you could return it, and the authorizer function is available in that environment. Then your authorizer can just return a condition that says, like only if this user also has this secondary thing. When that all the normal Cube API server, but it wouldn't just have any, like it wouldn't feed in any data, so that secondary check cannot be.
Would we say that everyone who is invoking an authorizer, when they are invoking an authorized check, at the point when they invoke it, need to make it clear whether they are expecting to support conditional authorization responses?
That's what we have, I think, at the moment.
All right. I know we did it for subject access review for all the places where we do secondary authorization check, whether it's through the Go interface or through the cell.
Yeah.
Like today, when you call those, it's not expecting conditional stuff. So you're not providing any context. You're not evaluating conditions. If we wanted to make those start evaluating conditions on some context, it seems like the caller would have to be the one to provide the context it would be evaluated on. And that would be a signal that, under the covers, it bubbles into, like, I accept conditional authorization, then I evaluate the conditional authorization on this context.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, if the caller provides the context, that seems okay, as long as like they're expecting to do it. They're saying, I'm gonna authorize this check and I accept conditional authorization responses. And if I get conditional authorization responses, I should evaluate them on this.
Yeah, here's the data to
Yeah.
evaluate. Yeah, yeah.
Does that cover like the Go based and the VAP based? I mean, the shape of that, obviously, we have to figure out like what the shape of that is, but the caller is responsible for explicitly providing the thing the conditions get evaluated on. And if they don't, then compatibility behavior says, oh, this must not be a conditional authorization check.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Matt, would you
And then
recommend?
it's to deny, most likely. Yeah.
That covers it. It doesn't say which choice we would make for validating admission policy. Would we make the choice of yes, there is context and this is what it is, or would we make the choice of no, there is not context? Uh, I've been trying to convince myself that I don't need to provide the context.
Uh, you don't need to provide the context, and therefore all of the VAP-based authorization checks do not support conditional authorization.
Correct. That's what I've been trying to convince myself of as is this is there still equivalent power because validating admission policy lets you write an expression directly on it. And it's similar power. It is not identical power, right? The
Yeah.
An authorizer could make all sorts of
Yeah, it's basically the union, the same thing as that happened in constrained impersonation, like the union of like when if you check stuff separately, then you don't know, the authorizer cannot kind of combine those data points and say that I only want the intersection of these. If I do 3 checks, right? Can I use A, can I use B, can I use C? Then there's no way to kind of, for the authorizer that maybe said that, well, you could only use A in the context of using B in some other way, right? Like that's basically the expressiveness that is lost if the conditional auth is not like
it's a
at that
very
level.
mathy way to describe it. The less mathy way to describe it would be that an authorizer would be able to make a choice based on an external system saying, hey, you got to have this. And that can change out of band of the validating admission policy. So the authorizer allows a division of responsibility between you write the validating admission policy and I write what the actual authorization rule will be. And if you embed it, you do not get that division.
Yeah. But why I didn't like kind of include this in the cap in the first place was that I felt, yeah, based on this discussion, I'll
I,
update whatever we want.
the
But
CAP
it
needs
felt
to
like
address
we can add
this.
it later, right? So
And
like
the CAP
if we
needs to
wanted to,
address the
yeah,
CAP needs to address what we're going to do.
yeah, yeah. So like, but if we want to add it later, we can. I think, like, even though we don't do it upfront.
Yeah, I kind of agree with David. I think you can get a lot of the power without bubbling it into the authorized check in VAP. I would
Yeah.
start by not doing it and saying VAP authorized checks are non-conditional.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think I would take a slightly maybe different extreme. I would say that the CAP should very carefully define exactly the places that we are saying will be conditional, and everything else by definition should be non-conditional. Um, which I think is relatively the same thing. Um, but in particular, I also feel like, for example, I don't think we should include anything about impersonation because there's nothing that requires it.
I,
And
I think it's fine to sweep the places we're calling the authorizer and like just list them out. Like here's all the places we call the authorizer, and all of these are going to be non-conditional, just so we can think through like that.
yeah, I think that will be necessary no matter what. What I'm more saying is for something like constrained impersonation, the the most useful thing that it cannot express today would still not be expressible by what's in this proposal, which is like when you are impersonating, what's the conditions on the shape of the objects that you're actually messing with, right? Like it doesn't let you go that far because it doesn't have an ability to describe that. And that's like the to me the actual thing missing. I'm not concerned about like coercing you to be, you must impersonate both the user and the group at the same time. Not worried about that. And while it would be nice to say when you're Bob, you can do this, and when you're Joe, you can do that, it's not to me sufficient to justify trying to build that at this exact moment. Because the thing I would care about most is like, I'll take the kubelet impersonation case, right? I want a node agent running on a kubelet to be able to create pod certificates based on that node, but only for a particular signer. And it's that particular signer bit that I cannot express. And that's the part that I actually care about.
Yeah, and then I think that like if we do care about it, we can make it. It's not like
I know, but like I know anything is technically possible. What I'm more saying is scope it down to the absolute minimum that moves us forward while leaving us places, whether it's rap or impersonation or whatever, right? And so I
yeah.
think the most important thing is like the core request authorization, right? With authorization. Everything else can come afterwards if we want it to. And that would be fine because everything else would default to I don't understand conditions. So if you don't send me any conditions, either allow, deny, or no opinion, but I can't do anything else for you right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
Um, David, have
So
we answered
closing
the
that,
question for you yet?
yeah, I think closing that off, I would like to see the cap updated to indicate one, we know that there's a loss of power. This is what the loss of power is, and probably that layman's explanation of uh, if the authorizer is deciding the condition to return, then that means a person different than the person who is managing the validating emission policy makes the decision about the condition. And that we are willing to forego that because we think that in the majority of use cases, it's unnecessary and not worth the complexity. And that is fully valid to me. I just want to make sure we close it off and write it down.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Right.
sorry.
David, is it okay to frame that as we forego that for now, not like forego
Sure.
that in perpetuity?
Yeah.
I think so, as long as we don't make other choices that make it impossible. I don't think we're going to make other choices that make it impossible, but it seemed like one of the first big choices. So secondary authorization checks and arrest handlers seems like we would catch those if we factored it the way that Jordan suggested. I'm not entirely clear on whether those are going to become case by case or whether they'll be not case by case.
So I listed the kind of, you have an update that turns into a crate, you have a patch that turns into a crate or update already in the cap, and then because those are the ones that when I did a grep of like every authorized call in the cube, those were the ones that I found, and then the secondary checks for exec. So like, well, there was some discussion about this in pretty recently as well. Like people were confused about like having get on pods exec, right? So then we are checking that can you do create on pods exec as well? And that's yeah, that's one of the checks that we would.
Wait, I just want to make clear it's how it's always behaved. Like it's not a privilege escalation, it's not a CVE. It like get on pod exec has always let you exec. It's just kubectl didn't happen to use that flow.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the same thing.
Sure,
Right? Like
but
you can curl your way to success.
my interest on that was not that one specifically. I'm just trying to find whether it will be, well, trying to solve the same problem. What do you actually pass as the context, right? So I want to say in some cases, like for Connect, I'm pretty sure we pass.
Yeah, so that is
The
part of the cap, like
Okay.
a concrete example for that. So like we pass the path. So for example, in nodes proxy, we pass the path, the URL basically. So like there was a cap that was specifically about tightening authorization for metrics and read-only paths of
So
stuff like that.
is the context the options or is the
Yeah,
context the pod? Okay. And
like yeah,
so
yeah, options was
yeah,
what I was thinking. Yeah.
yeah. And so I don't know if that will be obvious to everyone. I also don't know if that actually makes sense for every case that we have. On the exec path, absolutely. I don't know, and I haven't surveyed it. I don't know for sure that's the only secondary author. No, actually, I do know for sure. That's not the only secondary authorization check we do. We do a secondary authorization check, at least for CSRs, and that one does not take options. That one should logically take the CSR. Will it take the CSR?
No, it doesn't take anything. It's just that's one of the exact kind of what we just talked about, like one of the virtual resources which don't exist in the API server, and they.
So is that going to end up inconsistent? Are we going to have some secondary authorization checks in the REST handlers that have input and some that do not? And how do we choose what input to give them?
David, explain to me why we wouldn't just say only the authorization check in the with authorization request handler can do this and literally nothing else can.
It's an option. I don't know that I think it's the most reasonable one.
So let me
Could we
make
not progressively do that over time, though? Right? Like we could make it more expressive over time in backwards compatible ways, right?
yeah. So let me make one distinction clear in the exec case. So like options are always available in the conditions, right? So those would be like even if you do a like that, those are part of admission attributes, right? So those you could write your conditions on if options are available, right, for your verb. Then and those it depends, right, if they are there or not, and then it depends on your verb as well. If you have an object, or do you have old object, or do you have both, and stuff like that. So for the exec use case in particular, you would have the options variable, but I assumed you wouldn't have neither object nor old object, right? But it's not an inconsistency because it's still there's still three different variables, and it's still like what you're used to today. So you have connect like authorization and admission today. Oh, sorry, connect admission today as well. So it'd be the same.
So are you saying that okay, I'm not sure that I asked the question properly. So for exec and logs, I think that the flow that you described with the admission path will result in having context just for the main authorization request that takes these options. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not, and maybe this is me not remembering it. I'm not remembering the secondary authorization check on pods exec. And maybe I should pull up the code and find it.
Right. So
Yeah, I think Jordan just added it like very
yeah,
recently. Like
yeah,
it's not
really,
that you're not remembering it; it was like a release ago or something.
Okay.
yeah.
Jordan, why have you done this to me? Uh,
If you have complaints, I think it's still off by default. If you think we shouldn't,
It is not off by default.
oh, I thought it was off by default. Jordan, what'd you do?
We regained the permission you needed to run kube control exec to match.
I mean, you didn't need it. We just were being cautious.
You did need it to run kube control exec prior to.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah, that's true. Yes.
We
I guess. Yeah,
we
we made it so it didn't matter what your request verb was. Your authorization verb would always at least include create. It may also include get.
sure. For all of time, running kube control exec required create permission until we switched it to WebSockets. And then for a release or two, if you had a custom role that only granted get, kubectl exec worked. And that was concerning and confusing to some people. And we told them not to use start. Sure. Yeah. That's why I was willing to do this. um,
Yeah, so basically, to just like try to make it clear. So if you came in, what I was as I was looking at this, then at the authorization time, like when we only have the metadata, we need to figure out that should we use conditional authorization or not, right? Because if we should not, if there is no, like, if this request is not conditional authorized, if we get a conditional authorization like back, then, or a conditional response back, we need to reject it. Like, we need to fail fast, right? So like, take the example of a random pod get, right? So like, you would have now a request coming in, get pods, and now you ask the authorizer, are you able to do this? You get back a conditional, which is like, yeah, the authorizer shouldn't have done that because it's a get, right? But it still did. So now the API server needs to understand that, well, it's a get, so I shouldn't, like, I should ignore all the conditional responses that come back and fold to deny, right? If the authorizer behaves adversarially or misbehaves. So the thing here is like, if you do a create, if you do the happy path of like, you have a create request or like post whatever that does the WebSockets thing, and then if we say that conditional authorization is supported if the verb is create, update, delete, and maybe something else, only, because we know the authorizer knows the filter with authorization filter knows that there's an admission thing, standing behind it, which is basically what we need to know. Then it's fine. You can use conditional authorization and all of that kind of stuff. If it's a get pods exec, it's what should the with authorization filter do? Should we hard code that this is one of the things that, like, there's actually something behind, or this actually holds for any connect in general? Like, how does the with authorization filter know that something is a connect request when it seems to the authorizer like it's a get, right? So that was one of the questions that I had, and my like, what I was thinking is like, can we just say that, well, for those things that are creates, like, we support conditional, but if you come in through a get, it's not? Or do I try to find a way to pipe? I mean, we have the information, like, but should I find a way to plumb all the connect REST handler open API kind of data that some part of the API server, into the with authorization filter?
Doing one thing at sort of a generic filter layer, trusting that every concrete implementation of the handler later on in the chain is going to, like, call some function to verify something. It reminds me a lot of what we used to do with update admission. Like, we had, like, most things used the standard REST storage, and so most things used the default implementation. So most things correctly called update admission with the old object and the new object. But then we had, 5 or 10 like weird random virtual resources or sub resources or overridden resources like service and namespace and subject access review. And like, if we had some weird ones like that, and so we actually redid the interface so that the storage didn't get to have the incoming object until it provided the old object. Like the way the particular storage implementations got a handle to the new object they were supposed to do something with was by saying, please give me the new object. Here's my old object. And inside that call, that's where we ran admission. I don't know quite the analog here, but this feels similar where like a generic filter layer is deciding whether to let stuff through and then hoping if it let it through conditionally that something later in the chain like actually evaluates the conditions. So I can dig up like what we did. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but thinking through how would we make sure that the specific handlers are triggering the condition evaluation, and maybe they're the specific handlers don't have context that would let us evaluate conditions. That's fine. Like I just wanted to trigger conditional evaluation so that it says, oh, we don't have the object. We can't evaluate the conditions. This was conditional. Sorry, rejected.
Yeah.
Let me dig up the.
Yeah, and most likely it would be some kind of function that like when you for the people that use this new conditional aware with authorization filter, you would need to pass a function to tell like based on these attributes, like can it be conditional or not? Like so that's so that existing library, people that the vendor of the library don't kind of break.
But so we can there's a few ways to do it. One, we can make it structural so that like some piece of information the handlers need, they can't get unless they invoke some function. So that's what we did with admission. The other way we can do it is like with a test coverage type of thing, which we ended up also doing for webhooks. So like we look at every verb on every endpoint and we make a request to it in an integration test with and make sure that the admission thing gets called. So if we had an integration test that looks at every verb on every endpoint and has a test user that is only conditionally authorized and makes sure that the conditions are evaluated. Like probably some combination of those two, structural and test coverage.
Yeah, was Mo gonna say something?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Jordan, so we do need to be careful in regards to things like, aggregated API servers where by definition we don't have anything after like the handler chain basically, right? Because we just like reverse proxy to the aggregated API server. I think it works for regular requests. It will not work for like impersonated requests and stuff, right? Because we lose the information through that layer.
Yeah, we had already said we were okay with like Cube Aggregator doing the conditional thing, not being able to evaluate the conditions, letting it through to the backend, and expecting the backend either to be old and unaware of conditions, in which case it does a SAR call that is conditionless and gets a thumbs up or thumbs down, or being aware of conditions, so it does a SAR call, gets conditions, and then is responsible for evaluating them. I think for aggregation we'd already said.
Yeah.
Right. So that part's fine, right? But we don't necessarily have a solution for any kind of call that loses information through the handler chain, right? Like impersonation, for example.
Right. So secondary calls, either to the Go authorize interface or like the cell authorize function, I think we're going to say all the existing ones are conditionless. If we want to opt some of those into being condition aware, there will be some change, authorize with conditions or authorize with some arg, or like there will be some change they need to make to opt into conditions and being responsible for evaluating those conditions.
Yeah. Like I think we already in some of the previous meetings
in terms of like test coverage, I agree it'll be hard. Like I would expect the point in time where we change the call to opt a particular call site into being condition aware we better add a test that exercises we check those conditions, right?
Yep.
Okay. I have a different topic, but I don't know if we were done with the current thread.
Let me see. Yeah. So did you have a preference for either saying that if you come in to if you come into an exec or any connect with a get, then it would behave differently, like conditionless in one way, and then create pod exec would be conditions aware? Or do you want me to using this, like to pipe in basically like to the, if the with authorization filter expects a function that tells it like, is this request supporting conditions or not? Like if you have a function like that, should this function that we implement for the API server actually go and look up the, open API metadata of like, this is a connect request or not, such that you would always get, no matter how you hit a connect endpoint, you would always hit kind of conditionals, like condition awareness, because the the admission controller, like for connect, will implement, like it will run the admission chain, so it's fine. But even though it comes in through a get.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sorry. So the wait authorization filter, as we just discussed, it needs to get a yes no of like, is this request, does this request support conditions? In our case, we would say, if it's in general, if it's a get request, we would say no, it doesn't support conditions, because there's nothing behind the authorizer that stops the request afterwards. But for everything that has admission behind it, we would say yes, right? This function that figures out if a given request metadata, request info struct, is conditions aware or not, would need, as an exception, like in general, you could say create, update, delete if they have the verb yes, they are condition aware, right? But for connect requests, you could come in with metadata that says get pods exec, and there would still be like a admission controller behind it. So you could get a false negative, basically, if you put
Yeah, I mean, in the API server, like typed for all the built-in types, we
yes,
know if it's a connect.
yeah,
So for like an aggregated connect-like request where you're making a get, so the aggregator is like, I don't know, this looks like a get. It's not. It's something I'm going to proxy through, so I don't have special knowledge. If it runs conditionless, proxies through, and then the aggregated server.
yeah, the aggregation is fine. If it sees this is aggregated, then it always says yes. It's fine because there's someone else's problem, right? The aggregate, but for a kind of understanding that a certain request is a connect request, like should we just write an allow list of, like, in this function we say if pods exec, if it gets pods exec, yes. Or should I do the more fancy thing of like taking the, like we actually have the storage, information of like which things are what you implementing what interface and stuff like that. Should I try to do it the correct way, or yeah?
I mean, we should try to do it the correct way. See how much violence it requires. I I would like to follow the same derivation in API server wiring that we're doing for other stuff. So we decide whether to wire in connect admission based on the storage having like supporting connect. So
Right.
I would try to.
Okay, then I'll try. Yeah, it's just that like it will be one of these things that you need to kind of pass the storage handler
I
filter,
see how the authorization filter layer doesn't have
but
any information about the next level down.
yeah, no, like not in general. So like I would need to invert
I would
initialization of the Cube API server. I would need to initialize storage first, and then when I have a handle to the storage, I would give that when building the handler chain. So that's basically the question. Like that's the correct way to do it, to avoid special casing like certain things.
Yeah. I would try to avoid special hard-coded lists in the authorization filter and see if you can get the information somehow. I would. Yeah.
I'll try then. But I basically wanted to ask because it would be, if we would decide that not against it, then it would have been like wasted time to wrangle with that, probably like a day or two. I don't know what it's gonna take, but I'll check it. Yeah. With that, I think.
What was your question, Mo?
Yeah, Mo.
Okay, so my questions are like a little bit, I guess, maybe more fundamental to the whole thing. So I think one of the reasons we're saying that we don't want to decode request stuff and authorization is because we're concerned about like a DOS vector. At least, in the case of some other DOS vectors that exist, such as like HTTP2 stuff today, the only way to meaningfully protect against those is by putting a proxy in front of your API server, right? Because in order to be authorized, you must first be authenticated. So we're assuming the person, actor, attacker, whatever, is authenticated already. So the DOS mitigation stuff for HTTP2 and the API server just doesn't do anything because you're authenticated. So is that a meaningful reason? Like that's just one arbitrary DOS thing that I can think of in my mind. I'm not sure if that rationale actually holds because yes, you could DOS something, but you can really easily DOS the actual API server much easier using other vectors that are trivial to implement and sort of generic.
Yeah, I think the other main thing is mutation. So like you wanna run this after like on the ready object, right? So like, and you don't know what it's gonna look like before, even though you decode early. And then the third thing is if there's some time between like you authorize and then you mutate, you do whatever, and then at some point and as Jordan just said, like you get the old object. You get the new object only when you give the old one, right, in the storage somewhere at the really end, which is kind of, I looked at it, it looked very non-trivial, or like it looked like it would kind of break everything if we try to get the old object kind of up front, right? So like if we try to somehow get from a TD what is the old object most likely going to be when you then do something and assuming you would have done all of the mutations and stuff. So yeah, I think that is some of the main reasons. So what made it
Right.
like.
So I guess what I would ask there is how important are use cases that one depend on mutation? I would argue that that's a little bit antithetical to this whole thing because part of the point is to make it more obvious to a user what's happening. But if you have arbitrary mutations happening to their request, and that's what's getting authorized, the user has no idea what in the world the system is doing, right? Because they made a request, you mangled it, and then you authorized it, so they don't actually understand what happened at all, right? So I don't find that part super compelling. Um, and I know there's at least some use cases that depend on the old object being present to make some type of decision. I think what I would ask there is are those strictly necessary? Or would it be possible to have an authorization system where the authorizer just basically says, hey, I see this request that looks like the existing SAR. I need you to do it again against me, but this time actually decode the whole payload and send me that, right? So it would just be a binary, like, I need what the user sent you all the way. And whether it's the final object or not, doesn't matter.
I
And there is
definitely
no
have
old object.
opinions, Mo. So
I know people have opinions. Let me just frame that out, right? Um, the reason I'm asking this, right, is yes, it is clearly less powerful by definition because you're missing information, but it's also like much smaller in my opinion, like because you're not trying to conflate all the layers together to make sure that they all behave together. It does mean though that sort of the fundamental limit of such a system is the thing that you authorize on must be somewhere in the request metadata or payload. Um, I guess I'll leave it there. David, go for it.
yeah, I think only the final object matters. If you're gonna authorize on a thing, only the final object matters.
Well,
And
that can't be true because we care about the old object in the current design. So it has to be.
No, like the thing that will be persisted.
the thing that will be persisted is the thing that matters.
I,
We also care about the old object
yeah, yeah.
because you can't have use cases like you can only modify things with this field set and then or this label set and then you change that field or label. So like the first set of use cases that people are likely to have are going to require this, the old object. But the final object is the one that matters because that's the one that actually actuates the system. And that's why admission exists and why validating admission comes after mutating admission. It's not an accident that we built it that way. Because if you move validating admission to only validate on the request, it doesn't reflect the thing that is actually going to be persisted.
Yeah, and
Did you have some?
I agree. I also agree it's confusing for a user to like submit an object that doesn't have a field and some mutating emission thing or some rest storage thing like sets a field and then it fails validation or fails some policy check in some way. Like I agree that's confusing, but I think it's more confusing for a policy check to look at an object and say this object is fine, let it through, and then like a completely different object gets persisted and you have like someone lose their mind because like this policy was to make sure we never persist x and y, and I never let an object that had x and y through, and yet here are objects with x and y. Like what the heck? Like yeah.
one of the reasons was also that like um, to make one unified interface that actually like covers the stuff that we already have today, which is RBAC and BAP and validating admission. So then like I would really like to keep them consistent with that. So like if you have something that you already do with cell and BAP and whatever, and now like you want to move some part of that into the authorization system, then you can do so, and the result will be completely equivalent to what you did before. So like there shouldn't like be any difference between those.
Okay.
And yeah, yeah.
You
Oh, sorry.
convinced,
Go.
or if not convinced, beaten into submission.
Yeah. I guess then I would ask, um, to me, I think probably the biggest concern is I think what we've tried to talk about in some level, which is that um, we have to have some guards to make sure that whatever thing the authorization system is assuming will actually happen. Um, I haven't looked at our stuff in regards to this. It probably is impractical to pull more of like admission of like make it available to authorization. I assume like we can't reasonably probably do that.
You mean at a point in time, like doing it at the point when the authorization filter runs, or conceptually exposing it via conditions?
I think the former, like because at the end of the day, that's what we're saying we want effectively, right? Is we want authorization to not allow something unless admission also agrees, right? So, and we're trying to come up with this two-phased approach where the systems are trying to communicate, and we're really, really hoping that they never miscommunicate or we forget some piece somewhere. Um, what
I
are
mean,
we actually saying that we just want to move that layer into a space that's it's available so that way with authorization does both things? Like like we would still have to come up with some way of making it performant. What I'm more talking about is like, can we make it so that the system can't like forget?
for all of the verbs, for all of the resource handler verbs that map to admission, like our
Uh-huh.
existing coverage is quite comprehensive that admission is actually called. The only edge is like the gets that are actually connects. And so focusing on how we wire that up so that like by default, only the things that we map to admission and have tests to cover are going to support conditional authorization. And everything else is going to be like opt-in per, I'd like to wire it in a way that actually is looking at the REST handlers, but like an interface that says, here's a GET request. Do you support conditional authorization? And the default is no, unconditional.
Yeah.
And we'll have an implementation that's informed by storage interface implementations or something, and then we'll have tests for those. That seems not crazy to me. Leaning on the fact that we're very confident that admission is always called on the things that the verbs and resource handlers we say support admission.
Yeah,
I would.
the
So are we going to have some check in the authorization layer if you respond with a condition for a get that tries to make sure that that makes sense?
So again, when you call go authorize, when you call the go interface for authorization, you are deciding, am I calling conditional authorization or unconditional authorization? And the authorization filter will say, I'm expecting to support conditional authorization for these verbs on resources that go. So I will support conditional authorization. We could probably bake it into the implementation just like we did with audience support in token review, where if you call in and you didn't say I expect an audience and you get back something that has an audience, like the implementation of it, it's like the caller didn't expect this, and what the thing returned had some audience stuff. So no, this is an error. We could bake it into the implementation like that.
but in general, like the idea is not to take everything that you have in admission or VIP or something today and kind of try to shove it into the authorization. That is not the point. It's more like the stuff where it's really like, because in the validating admission side, you're going to have lots of stuff like, is this container image signed by SIG-Store and that those kind of things, like which apply to all users no matter who they are. But then the stuff where it's really important which user has access to some users have access to create object with one shape and some users don't, and then
So
that's where it's useful, because they
to
can.
answer your question, Mo, yes, it would be an error if a GET request came in that wasn't a special connect admission GET request,
Yeah.
and the authorizer came back with conditions. Like how we make that an error, I would like to make it in the authorizer implementation, but we can do it.
I'll try to wire it up. We'll see how bad it is.
So yeah, that would be an error if you got back conditions somehow from that.
Yes.
Okay.
Our time is up. I will try to do better in reading the full design between now and next week. Are there things, and we can always like talk in Slack between now and then if there are things we want to clarify, fold these things back in, and yeah, we'll sync up next week or between.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the review, and see you.
Cheers.
See you.
Bye.